Starkiller. Starkiller was a code name for a Force-sensitive human male taken on by the Sith Lord Darth Vader as his secret apprentice and personal assassin during the reign of the Galactic Empire. He was born on the Wookiee homeworld of Kashyyyk in the aftermath of the Clone Wars, some time before the Battle of Yavin. During the early years of the Galactic Empire and the Great Jedi Purge, Galen Marek was only a child. The son of Kento Marek and Mali Marek, Galen was born with an extremely powerful connection to the Force. His parents were both members of the Jedi Order. They married in secret during the Clone Wars, a conflict between the Galactic Republic and the Confederacy of Independent Systems, which they continued to participate in until Mali became pregnant. As a result, they reluctantly deserted the Order and fled to the Outer Rim territories prior to Order 66, a contingency directive that instructed all Republic clone troopers to execute their Jedi officers. The Marek family was constantly on the run, moving from one planet after another in an effort to maintain anonymity in the increasing tensions of the war. They ultimately settled on Kashyyyk around the time of Order 66. However, their new life was cut short when Mali was killed while protecting Wookiees from their enemies, leaving her husband to raise Galen alone. When Imperial spies learned of the Jedi's fight with the Slavers, a large military force was deployed to Kashyyyk under the command of the Emperor's apprentice, the Sith Lord Darth Vader. During the battle, Vader defeated Kento Marek in a lightsaber duel and discovered the Jedi Knight's son. Impressed by Galen's potential in the Force, as demonstrated by his reflexive use of telekinesis when he disarmed Vader, Vader abducted the young Marek shortly after he killed the boy's father and a squad of stormtroopers in order to keep Galen's existence a secret. Despite his outward loyalty to Palpatine, Vader harbored much hatred towards his Sith master and intended to overthrow him with Marek as his secret apprentice. As such, he endeavored to teach the ways of the dark side of the Force to his new disciple, whom he first controlled through fear before training Marek to harness his anger and other base emotions. Ensconced on board Vader's incomplete starship, the Executor, and given the codename Starkiller, the apprentice repressed all the memories of his previous life and spent the next 2 decades training as a Sith under Darth Vader's supervision, with the ultimate goal of standing at Vader's side against Palpatine. Darth Vader was not a kind guardian, and his brutal training methods bordered on torture. He taught Starkiller to draw on his hate and rage for power, while giving him training in only the basics before forcing the apprentice to develop his own methods through sparring matches and brutal tests. Starkiller was provided with a lightsaber training holodroid, Proxy, who was capable of credibly imitating Jedi, and programmed to regularly attack Starkiller with lethal intent to keep him sharp, another brutal training regimen devised by Vader. Despite this, Proxy developed a close relationship with his master, providing the Force adept with enough compassion to stay sane. Despite Vader's cruel treatment, some of the worst horrors Starkiller endured were actually self-inflicted. On one occasion, Starkiller had Proxy chain him immobile in the dark and deprive him of nourishment until he had successfully assembled a lightsaber through telekinesis. While the exercise had been a failure, Starkiller felt it had strengthened him. In meditation, Starkiller took to staring at his ignited lightsaber blade, using the red coloration to make himself think of anger and carnage in order to draw on the dark side of the Force. However, Starkiller remained endlessly frustrated by his inability to experience visions of the future, and as such, any break from usual routine would surprise him. Starkiller took on the role of Vader's personal assassin and enforcer, dispatching problematic individuals throughout the Imperial military and government with vicious enthusiasm. Starkiller personally developed into a staunch imperialist, viewing these assassinations as a form of service to the Empire. To this end, Starkiller was provided with a custom-designed ship, the Rogue Shadow, and an Imperial officer assigned to serve as his pilot, as although Starkiller was a skilled pilot in his own right, Vader preferred that his apprentice focus on meditation and other exercises, while an enlisted pilot developed him to his destination. There was evidently a high turnover for such individuals, as they were either killed in the field or executed by Vader. When engaging Vader in a sparring match in 3 before the Battle of Yavin, Starkiller expected it to be business as usual afterward. However, at the end of it, Vader ordered Starkiller to kneel before him. Believing that his time had come to an end, Starkiller obeyed and waited for death. Instead, Darth Vader formally knighted Starkiller, officially recognizing him for the first time as his apprentice, something that Starkiller always believed himself to be. He declared Starkiller's training complete and dispatched him on his first test. The surviving Jedi Master, Kota, was attacking an Imperial shipyard above Nar Shaddaa. In response, Vader ordered Starkiller to kill Kota and to bring the Jedi's lightsaber back as proof of Kota's death. Vader also left Starkiller with orders to leave no witnesses by killing everyone on the shipyard, including the Imperial troops, an order the Imperialist Starkiller found disturbing. But not wishing to displease his master, Starkiller was quick to hide his reluctance and voiced his compliance, convincing himself that it was just another stepping stone to achieving his Sith destiny. On his way out to his ship, Starkiller was ambushed by Proxy, who was using his Obi-Wan Kenobi combat module. Starkiller quickly defeated Proxy, causing him to drop out of his Jedi appearance, though Starkiller expressed surprise at Proxy's use of such an old module, one he thought erased. As he approached the Rogue Shadow, Starkiller awkwardly met with his new pilot, Juno Eclipse.
Why are we whispering? Who's that? Yes. Your new pilot has finally arrived, Master. Accessing Imperial records.
Captain Juno Eclipse, born on Corellag, where she became the youngest student ever accepted into the Imperial Academy. Decorated combat pilot with over 100 combat missions, and commanding officer during the bombing of Kalos. Hand-picked by Lord Vader to lead his Black 5 squadron, but later reassigned to a top-secret mission. Is there a psychological profile in there too?
Actually, yes. But it's restricted. Oh, Master, I can tell you she's going to be impossible to reprogram.
The main reason for Starkiller's surprise was that he had never had a female pilot before, and he afterwards became convinced that it was some sort of test from Vader. Kota was a respected Jedi general during the Clone Wars, but while he was a military genius, he considered clone troopers unfit for battle, instead relying on his own militia. When Order 66 was issued, there were no clones in his squad to obey, and Kota was able to disappear. Starkiller quickly deduced that Kota's primary motivation for coming out of hiding and attacking the Empire was to attract attention. He wanted to be found. Upon arrival at Nar Shaddaa, Starkiller became increasingly troubled by Vader's order to leave no witnesses, as many of his eventual victims were loyal Imperial citizens, whose only error was to cross his path, though Starkiller satisfied himself that this was yet another test from Vader, and steeled himself. As the Rogue Shadow, guided by Juno Eclipse's deft hand, approached the TIE Fighter construction facility that Kota and his men were currently attacking, Starkiller centered himself in the violence and conflict from within. Starkiller would encounter Kota at the construction facility's command center. Both were surprised by what they saw. Starkiller had been taught that the Jedi was soft from a life of privilege, and hadn't expected the hardened soldier that Kota was, while Kota had been expecting Darth Vader to come personally, not to send a boy. They fought vigorously. Each would continuously gain and lose ground in the battle, fighting for some time until their lightsabers were locked in place. As the blades ground against one another, Kota noted that he sensed that Starkiller hadn't been entirely consumed by the dark side, and that Vader didn't turn him to it entirely just yet. Furthermore, at that moment, Kota had a vision of the future.
Vader won't always be your master. I sense only me.
Unconcerned by this revelation, Starkiller blinded Kota before he was sent flying into Nar Shaddaa's atmosphere. Starkiller retrieved Kota's lightsaber before he himself jumped out through the shattered viewports, landing on top of the rogue shadow as it passed underneath. While satisfied that the gravely wounded and blinded Kota would no longer be a problem, Starkiller was disappointed by his failure to actually kill the Jedi. Darth Vader was pleased with Starkiller's performance, but felt that his apprentice remained unfocused and easily distracted, drawing Kota's lightsaber on him to illustrate his point. Trained through the Sith arts, Starkiller knew that the rule of two dictated that there can only be two Sith at one time, and he could not consider himself an apprentice as long as Vader's master, Darth Sidious, still lived. As such, Vader kept Starkiller's existence a secret, hoping to one day use him to overthrow his master. As Starkiller's training neared completion, Vader ordered him to kill the few remaining members of the Jedi Order, including Ram Kota, Kazdan Paratus, and Shak Ti. Starkiller completed his missions, prevailing against these more experienced targets. When encountering Shak Ti, upon defeating her, she pitied the apprentice, believing he could have been so much more had he not become Vader's assassin. After completing his final mission, Starkiller returned to Vader's ship. As the two stood side by side, overlooking a fleet of Imperial Star Destroyers which clustered around the Executor, the Emperor's flagship, Starkiller concluded that Vader had lured the Emperor here, to them, so they could finally overthrow him. But Vader then corrected him, noting that he did not call for the Emperor's presence, stating that the Emperor's spies had followed Starkiller here. At that moment, the Emperor entered the room, and Vader ignited his lightsaber through his shocked pupil's abdomen. Palpatine declared that Vader had forgotten his place, and taking on Starkiller as his apprentice had been an act of treachery. The Emperor demanded Starkiller's death, and after a moment of hesitation, Vader complied, ignoring Starkiller's pleas. The apprentice was thrashed about the chamber and smashed through the viewport into the vacuum of space, much to Palpatine's sadistic delight. While Starkiller was unconscious, his body was collected from the vacuum by Vader's droids and brought to the Dark Lord's science vessel, the Empirical. While Starkiller's body was rebuilt, he remained unconscious, believing himself dead as he experienced a multitude of visions and memories. When he finally awoke, he was relieved for the end of the visions, but he screamed when he realized the nature of his circumstances. He was restrained on a laboratory table, with Darth Vader standing above him. Starkiller accused Vader of trying to kill him, but Vader told him that his execution was Palpatine's demand, which forced the Sith Lord's hand. Starkiller was presented with the option of re-entering Darth Vader's service, with the assurance that if he refused, he and all witnesses would be destroyed in the laboratory's self-destruction. With no other options, Starkiller grudgingly accepted, and Vader released his apprentice's restraints. Starkiller remained loyal to Vader, believing they would still overthrow the Emperor, but through a different plan. Darth Vader elaborated that with Palpatine's spies watching his every move, he needed a distraction to divert attention away from himself. While the laboratory droids provided him with a new lightsaber, Starkiller suggested an assassination to achieve such a goal, though Vader dismissed it, as no single act of that kind would gain Palpatine's notice. Instead, Vader made clear that Starkiller would have to raise an army to oppose the Emperor, an alliance of rebels and descendants. Vader gave Starkiller free rein in how to pursue his objective, leaving only the order that he was to sever all ties to his past, save Proxy, to ensure that no one found out that he served Vader. With the final assurance that the dark side was always with Starkiller, Vader cut his transmission, revealing that he was communicating via Proxy. Proxy was overjoyed by his master's survival, as it meant that he could still fulfill his primary programming and kill Starkiller himself eventually. Informing Starkiller of their location aboard the Empirical in the Dominus system, Proxy then hacked into the Empirical's navigation system and set it on a collision course for the Dominus star, forcing him and Starkiller to make their way to the rogue shadow before imminent destruction of the Empirical. When Starkiller inquired about Juno, Proxy informed him that she was alive and on board, left in a holding cell after being branded a traitor for her association with Starkiller. As they encountered Imperial forces aboard the dying ship, Starkiller drew his new lightsaber, realizing it was Kota's former weapon. Despite Proxy's caution that saving Juno was contrary to Vader's orders to sever ties with his past, Starkiller made a beeline for Juno's cell and rescued her, assuring her that he was leaving the Empire behind, thus keeping her in the dark about his continued allegiance to Vader. Starkiller brought her along to continue working as his pilot. Explosive bolts severed the umbilical connecting the rogue shadow to the Empirical just as they boarded, and Starkiller ordered Proxy to fly the ship away from the science vessel. Juno took control of the ship almost immediately after, with Starkiller giving her free rein as to their destination. Once they escaped, Starkiller shared with her his intention to create a rebel army to oppose the Empire, as well as his desire to find a teacher to show him the aspects of the Force that Darth Vader could not, or would not. To that end, they resolved to find Kota, who had survived his duel with Starkiller. Starkiller's search for Kota took him across the galaxy, from the Jedi's last sighting on Nar Shaddaa to the ancient Sith world Ziost, and then discovered Kota's latest location on Bespin. Kota, after his defeat and blinding by Starkiller, had fallen into depression and had resorted to alcoholism to drown his sorrows. Intercepting an Imperial transmission that Kota had been found, and that the Empire was sending one of its most dangerous agents to retrieve him, Starkiller was forced to rush to Bespin, approaching Kota in the Vapor Room cantina, masquerading as a Jedi. Kota was drunk and uncooperative, and before Starkiller could reason further with the unkempt Jedi, they were attacked by the local stormtrooper garrison. For the first time, Starkiller actively engaged the Empire as an enemy, rather than merely killing off possible witnesses. While Kota dived under the table, Starkiller drew his lightsaber and attacked. Starkiller found himself hampered by the need to avoid harming innocent bystanders, if only to keep up his Jedi masquerade, though he still intended to use his original landing site to extract Kota. While Kota eventually got moving, Starkiller hoped that the Jedi could look after himself. Cutting through the Vapor Room's storeroom, Starkiller didn't hesitate to attack the Imperial forces, making short work of them. While in Kota's presence, Starkiller refrained from drawing on the dark side of the Force, but as the drunken Jedi made himself scarce, searching out an alternative escape route, this allowed Starkiller to drop his masquerade and draw on the dark side. As he stood in triumph, quite some time later, and having defeated a significant number of enemies, Kota appeared. Kota was unimpressed by Starkiller's victory, feeling that it didn't even begin to dent Palpatine's infinite army. However, after Starkiller appealed to his warrior's sense of honor, Kota agreed to join him, revealing that he had a contact in the Imperial Senate who could use Starkiller's lightsaber due to his eagerness to kill stormtroopers. This would be the first step towards his mission's success. Starkiller would manage to build an alliance from that point onward. When Starkiller communicated with his master via proxy, Vader was satisfied by Starkiller's progress and provided him with a new target. However, Vader also admonished Starkiller for his developing emotional attachments to his new allies. Reminding Starkiller of where his true allegiance belonged, Vader terminated his link through Proxy. Proxy commented that he hated being Vader, with Starkiller mentioning that Vader probably did as well. At that moment, however, Proxy noticed that Juno was in the chamber, having witnessed the entire exchange. Although Eclipse was furious that Starkiller was still loyal to Vader, she decided to remain with Starkiller, believing that the fate of the rebellion would ultimately be in the hands of the apprentice, not his master. After the confrontation with Juno, Starkiller replaced the green crystal in his lightsaber, formerly Kota's, with the blue crystal he had found in his ruined family home on Kashyyyk, thus making the weapon truly his own. Starkiller informed the Dark Lord that while the pieces were falling into place, the rebels were still scared and were only beginning to trust him. Starkiller cautioned that if he and Vader were discovered communicating, or if the rebels even suspected his past, then the entire mission would be a failure. Vader stipulated that Starkiller contact him soon before severing the link. When Juno questioned Vader's intentions, Starkiller assured her that the Dark Lord wouldn't endanger the mission by intervening, regardless of his doubts. Starkiller further stated that he was doing what was right, for both himself and Juno. Starkiller and his companions traveled to Corellia to meet with the leaders of the rebellion. Ultimately, it was concluded that Bail Organa's wealth would fund the rebellion, Garm Bel Iblis would provide the military hardware, and Mon Mothma the soldiery. Starkiller would be the ultimate leader and figurehead, his involvement providing the power of the Force. Ram Kota then appeared, sober and cleaned up, declaring that he would join as well, if he was welcome. Bail Organa finalized the Corellian Treaty, and the rebellion was officially declared against the Galactic Empire. Just at that moment, the mountaintop temple ruin they were using as their meeting place was attacked by the Imperial military. As Imperial snowtroopers burst into the chamber, Organa ordered Proxy to cut Leia Organa's communication to hide her involvement. Darth Vader marched into the chamber, ordering his troops to take the rebels alive for personal execution by the Emperor. Kota drew his lightsaber and rushed Vader, but the Sith Lord simply caught him in a telekinetic grip and tossed him aside. With Kota disabled and the rebels surrounded by snowtroopers, Vader advanced on Starkiller, complimenting his pupil's performance and revealing his status as the Dark Lord's secret apprentice to the shocked rebels. Vader then cast the stone table at the center of the chamber at Starkiller, driving him outside into the snow. Starkiller managed to survive, thankful that his reconstruction on the Empirical had drastically increased his physical endurance. Attempting to regain his feet, Starkiller angrily questioned Vader for interfering as the Sith Lord had agreed to stay away. Vader revealed that he had lied, and not just about Starkiller's mission, but from the very beginning. Starkiller quickly deduced that the very beginning referred to the start of his apprenticeship, and thus he realized that his entire life had been a sham, and that Vader never intended to destroy the Emperor. Darth Vader confirmed this, though he added that he didn't intend to dethrone the Emperor with Starkiller specifically. Lifting him in a Force grip, Vader tossed him towards the edge of the mountaintop cliff, though Starkiller managed to cling to the brink. Accepting that his true mission to gather the rebels for quick capture and execution was complete, Starkiller concluded that he deserved to die for plotting to use the Rebel Alliance for his own ends, though he remained angry at having been outwitted. As Vader advanced to kill his own disciple, Starkiller declared that without him, Darth Vader would never be free. Vader raised his lightsaber and prepared to strike, but was forced to break off when he was attacked by Obi-Wan Kenobi. Though caught off guard, Vader quickly rallied and defeated his opponent, revealed to be Proxy using his Obi-Wan Kenobi combat module. During the brief fight, Starkiller lost his grip on the cliff ledge and fell to the bottom. Although he survived the fall, Starkiller lay unconscious in the snow for some time. When Juno, who had escaped the Imperials, arrived aboard the Rogue Shadow to find him, Starkiller had regained consciousness, though he was still weak. Rejecting the code name, Starkiller, Darth Vader's former apprentice reclaimed his birth name, Galen Marek, and for the first time considered himself as a Jedi. Marek would thereafter track down Vader's location and travel to the incomplete Death Star. Using the ship's cloaking device, Galen and Juno approached the massive space station. Standing on the open boarding ramp of the Rogue Shadow, Galen and Juno exchanged their last words.
I have a really bad feeling about this.
Well, then maybe we're doing something right.
Am I going to see you again?
If I can free the rebels, they're gonna need extraction. Probably not, no.
Then I'll never need to live this down.
At first, Galen was surprised by Juno's sudden action, but then he returned the embrace. After their first and last kiss, Galen said farewell and leapt into the Death Star's extensive superstructure. When he faced his former apprentice, Vader acknowledged that he had trained his student well, but declared that Galen still had much to learn, though Galen countered that Vader had nothing left to teach him. Vader, utterly confident that he would best Galen easily, opened the battle with a simple double strike. Galen was caught off guard by the power of the blow, which jarred his wrists and shoulders and nearly disarmed him. Ducking under two savage slashes, he stabbed at the Dark Lord's abdomen before flicking his blade up, trying to spear Vader through the throat. Vader only barely managed to block, and both combatants momentarily broke off. Galen realized that until this duel, he and Vader had never truly fought as equals. During his training, either Galen would capitulate or Vader would hold back. They fought back and forth, with Galen taking a defensive stance against Vader's overwhelming offense. As he fended off Vader's series of attacks, he danced around the Dark Lord's defenses, testing their limits, all the while taunting Vader. He mocked his former master with the knowledge that while Galen had broken free from Vader's control, Vader himself lacked the wherewithal to free himself from Sidious. Realizing that there were better ways to kill than to call on his anger, Galen came to pity Vader, seeing the Dark Lord as a result of the same manipulations and abuse as himself, and thus desired to kill him as a way of freeing his former master from the pain of being enslaved to the Sith. Galen's taunts, especially his professions of pity, enraged Vader, who ramped up the intensity of his attack. Galen continued to use his self-taught moreso to great effect, wasting little energy and turning Vader's would-be death blows into superficial burns. As Vader continued to relentlessly attack, Galen suddenly counterattacked with a blast of Force lightning, which broke Vader's momentum and forced him onto the defensive for the first time. Galen began to steadily gain ground, while Vader fell back. Eventually, Galen saw an opening in Vader's defenses and took advantage of it, slashing Vader across the throat. Surprised but elated, Galen scored 2 more hits on the Dark Lord in short order before telekinetically pummeling Vader with any and all objects he could find. The last such missile was an energy field generator which detonated on impact with Vader. The blast severely damaged the Sith Lord's armor and respirator, and destroying most of his mask and helmet. As Galen approached his former master, intending to finish him, he saw Vader's face uncovered for the first time. Vader, much to the shock and surprise of Galen, was a terribly scarred old man, in whose eyes Galen saw only pain and exhaustion. As he froze, Palpatine approached, praising Galen for his victory, seeing a perfect opportunity to replace his hobbled apprentice. Palpatine gleefully encouraged Galen to execute Darth Vader and take his rightful place at the Emperor's side. Galen became conflicted, the changes brought on by his recent experiences with the rebels, warring against his desire to continue using the dark side and becoming a true Sith Lord. In addition, though Vader's horribly scarred visage elicited pity from Galen, a significant part of him still wanted revenge. Kota, sensing Galen's indecision, intervened and telekinetically snatched Palpatine's lightsaber, using it to kill his guards before rushing the Emperor himself. But Palpatine easily fended off Kota with a blast of Force lightning. The sudden violence snapped Galen back to reality, and he realized that he didn't want to go back to what he once was, not after seeing what it did to people. He came to understand that executing Vader would accomplish nothing, whereas saving the rebels could change the course of history. With his final decision made, he resisted the urge to kill Vader and instead attacked Palpatine. The Emperor managed to pull out his other lightsaber before Galen attacked, and Marek and Palpatine at last began an intensely ferocious duel. They seemed to be at a standstill, with both Marek and the Dark Lord proving to be just equally relentless and matched in all fields they fought with, such as telekinesis, force lightning, and lightsaber combat, neither managing to hit one another. As they fought, Palpatine revealed that Galen had never been Vader's secret apprentice, and that he was abducted from Kashyyyk on the Emperor's orders. Darth Vader had been little more than a proxy. It was Darth Sidious who had been Galen Marek's true master all along. Enraged by the sudden revelation, Galen drew substantially greater ferocity and strength from the rage he felt, and quickly seized the offensive by further pressing his attack against the Emperor. Dodging Palpatine's Force lightning strikes, or channeling them into his lightsaber, Galen closed the distance. Throwing Palpatine off of his feet with a telekinetic shockwave, Galen then blasted the Dark Lord of the Sith against the ceiling of the dome with a Force push before slamming him against the ground. Darth Sidious rose to his knees and declared that it was Galen's destiny to destroy him by giving in to his hatred. Galen initially struggled with the urge to do so, but repented in the end, extinguishing his lightsaber. As the rogue shadow landed nearby, Galen told Kota to get the rebels aboard, but then Darth Sidious fired a blast of lightning into the Jedi Master's back. Without hesitation, Galen immediately stepped into the stream of lightning, taking the full brunt of it himself. The pain was unlike anything he had ever endured under the years of Darth Vader's tutelage. The sheer and overwhelming power of the Emperor's lightning caused Galen to feel as though a star was igniting within his chest. Overcoming the pain just enough to absorb and gather the energy, Galen advanced on the Emperor as the two remained locked in the chain of lightning. At the same time, he noticed that a squadron of stormtroopers had entered the chamber, with Darth Vader limping behind them, in pursuit of the fleeting rebel leaders. With no other option left, Galen grabbed the Emperor's shoulders and redirected the lightning into the Dark Lord, causing Palpatine to share in the agonizing pain of his own power. Driven by concern for his friends, Galen embraced the Force completely and released all of the pent-up energy. This resulted in a massive shockwave that killed the stormtroopers and destroyed much of the dome. In the last moments of his life, Galen felt himself leaving his body as death took hold of him. With his final thought centered on Juno Eclipse, Galen Marek whispered his birth name for the last time and died. Although he ultimately perished as a result of the explosion of Force energy, he transcended physical existence and became one with the Force. Galen Marek's early lightsaber training consisted of a simple tutorial on the basics before Darth Vader took to fighting him in brutal sparring matches, the goal being to encourage his apprentice to develop his own methods. He sparred frequently with his master, as well as engaging in many vicious duels with his training droid Proxy, and won every single time. An incredibly skilled lightsaber duelist, Marek was able to defeat the droid's training programs, replicating some legendary duelists such as Obi-Wan Kenobi and Darth Maul. Marek was able to defeat Kota, Kazdan Paratus, and Maris Brood, and he even managed to overwhelm Shak Ti and his former master Darth Vader, both of whom were two of the greatest duelists of their time. He was also capable of fighting on par with Darth Sidious himself, arguably the greatest Sith swordmaster of all time, and a duelist nearly equal to Grandmaster Yoda in lightsaber combat, although he only won with the Force. Marek was versed enough with all 7 forms of lightsaber combat to quickly recognize them in his opponent's style and technique and use their weaknesses to his advantage. He particularly specialized in Juyo,
perhaps one of the greatest styles, learned only by the most skilled of Force wielders. Impressive. In many ways, some have described it as a surrender to the Force and to chaos, to strike at an opponent with such speed and angles of attack that they have difficulty countering it. Your number of attacks will increase, and you will notice many more of them shall slip beneath an opponent's guard, critically wounding them. But in surrendering yourself to the Force in such a way reduces your ability to resist its effects should the enemy turn the Force against you. Be on your guard.
He also specialized in Xian,
an aggressive technique, but it is powerful, effective. It can counter blaster weapons and add to the damage of your critical.
And he specialized in Soresu,
a defensive technique, but effective. Use it if you do not wish to be hit or if you are facing many opponents with blasters. With a lightsaber blade and enough skill in deflection, it is an excellent defense against blasters, but in other situations, it merely delays the inevitable.
He also had decent skills in Niman, showing great skill in combating Force attacks with his combat style.
A blending of younger forms, and all of them in moderation. In the blending, much of the individuality is lost, but the strengths are spread evenly, and there is little weakness in it. Its great strength is the way it allows the Force to flow through you, revitalizing one even in the middle of combat.
As well as Ataru, applying aspects of the form into his combat style.
This technique is good against a lone opponent, and you will find your critical strikes are more effective, but you will be vulnerable to almost everyone else you are fighting.
His application of Juyo was highly focused and aggressive, his style being randomized and unpredictable, laced with sudden Force-based attacks in the midst of complex lightsaber techniques. His focus and concentration allowed him to bring down opponents through sheer tenacity, though it also led him to ignore his surroundings and left him open to attacks from other directions. As a lightsaber duelist, Starkiller favored the Xian variant of Form 5. Whenever forced onto the offensive, he would fall back on his practice of Soresu. Marek's Form 3 usage was largely self-taught, his skills acquired through imitation of Proxy's Obi-Wan Kenobi combat module. Despite his lack of formal training, Marek's prowess in Soresu was outstanding. A notable application of his improvised Form 3 usage was during his duel with Kota, where Marek's skill enabled him to hold off Kota's Juyo frenzy long enough to tire out the Jedi. He also effectively employed this technique during his duel with Darth Vader, easily deflecting the ferocious yet considerably well-executed attacks of his overconfident opponent without issue to wear Vader out and then quickly counterattack. Marek also proved able to defend himself against other highly aggressive duelists such as Kazdan Paratus and Maris Brood, ultimately allowing him to defeat them. Marek was also highly skilled in the use of Xian, heavily favoring the unorthodox reversed grip of the form. He practiced a variant of the style known as Sith Xian, a fighting method that relied on sudden and rapid attacks to bring down an opponent quickly. Marek was adept at Dunmöch, the Sith art that used psychological warfare to cause enemies to lose focus, as shown by how quickly he was able to get Vader to be blind with rage via taunts. Even as a child, Galen Marek was already exceptionally powerful in the Force, with immense potential that would have allowed him to become one of the most powerful Force users of all time. His power proved great enough to impress Vader, enough that he risked sparing him to mold him as an apprentice, believing that he had the potential to, alongside Vader, and when at the height of his abilities, defeat Darth Sidious, who was considered the most powerful Dark Lord of the Sith in history. Even Sidious himself acknowledged that Marek's strength in the Force could rival his own. As a young adult, having been trained extensively to be a living weapon capable of helping Darth Vader in defeating Sidious, Marek became an immensely powerful and proficient Force adept, with his power being acknowledged by the Jedi he had faced and defeated, and Vader believing him to be ready to aid him in executing Sidious. While his usage of the Force's combative nature, especially that of the dark side, was outstanding, his solely combative training rendered him unable to use less aggressive Force powers. For instance, he struggled provoking Force visions. After fully tuning to the light, he had overcome this limitation, as he finally became capable of voluntary farsight, while he could not do so earlier when he still submerged himself in the dark side despite frequent attempts. At the same time, he fully retained his exceptional skill in applying the Force in battle, as shown by his ability to best his former master and even eventually Sidious himself in single combat, although when he was using the light side, he seemingly could not defeat the Dark Lord, only match him. Once Marek got enraged by the revelation that it was Sidious who was his master, he was able to channel the dark side and gain enough power to make short work of the Emperor soon after, although it briefly overrode his self-control to the point he would have killed Sidious had Kota not stopped him. In his final stand, although it cost him his life, Marek ultimately managed to overpower the Emperor's full strength by drawing power from his concern for his allies and unleashed a burst of power that nearly killed both Sidious and Vader and heavily damaged the Death Star 1. Marek's skills with telekinesis were considerable, and he often cleared entire hallways and rooms with powerful Force pushes and repulses, and even caught TIE fighters in mid-flight. Even as a child, he was skilled enough that he managed to disarm Vader of his lightsaber without him even knowing, impressing the Dark Lord visibly. Proficient at telekinetic lightsaber combat, he would often direct his lightsaber to seek out specific enemies and impale them, often killing them instantly. He was even able to redirect fired missiles and ballistics. Through the use of telekinesis, he could, albeit with great effort, change the direction of a falling Imperial-class Star Destroyer and force it to the ground. In addition, Marek was also able to use this ability for fine manipulation, such as dismantling and reassembling his lightsaber during meditation sessions. Marek's telekinetic proficiency was even great enough that, when angered, he was capable of telekinetically overtaking Sidious, easily blasting him off his feet with a powerful Force wave and force pushing him against the ceiling of the dome before smashing him to the ground. As a trained Sith apprentice, Marek became extremely proficient in Force lightning, with his skill rivaling even that of Darth Sidious. He could cast energy so powerful that it would kill an opponent with a single blast, and could target more than one opponent at a time. He was also able to channel lightning attacks through his lightsaber, thus amplifying blade attacks with dark side energy. He applied lightning in a more tactical manner, charging up or shorting out certain types of machinery. Furthermore, Marek could manipulate the technique to generate Sith Seekers, essentially a combination of Force Push and Force Lightning. This was a very uncontrollable form of Force Push. It would involve pushing a target through the Force, then generating a ball of lightning which would be blasted after the target, hence Sith Seeker. The lightning exploded on impact with an opponent or object. Starkiller was the only known practitioner of this ability. Marek was also highly proficient in the defensive Force techniques, displaying great skill in the use of Force deflection and tutaminis. Tutaminis was an umbrella title used by the Jedi Order to classify Force abilities related to energy absorption, This could refer to such instances as dissolving a lightsaber blade, as Satele Shan successfully demonstrated in her battle against Darth Malgus. Another example was the ability to absorb Force lightning, which Starkiller successfully demonstrated in his battle against Darth Sidious, although not without immense effort, and redirecting it back at the Sith Lord, causing Sidious to share the same agonizing pain Marek was feeling, eventually unleashing all the pent-up Force energy in a devastating explosion that nearly claimed the lives of his enemies, and destroyed much of the terrifying Death Star 1. Marek's clone also retained this ability. He was more than capable of aptly deflecting blaster bolts by imbuing his free hand with the Force whenever he could not rely on his lightsaber to protect him. Another power that Marek learned during his time as a secret apprentice was Mind Trick, the ability to control the minds of other individuals, especially weak-willed beings. Through this technique, Marek could compel subjects to do his bidding, ignore his presence, or simply lose consciousness. In battle, he would use this skill to confuse his enemies and spread disorganization and chaos. In addition to his considerable array of techniques, he possessed a version of the Force Speed ability, which enabled him to dart quickly across short distances. Marek's first lightsaber appeared to be based on the design utilized by Darth Vader, featuring an emitter shroud and a mostly solid casing. However, rather than follow the oversized, bulky design of his master's weapon, Marek opted for a considerably more skeletal make. His weapon featured an exposed crystal chamber, and rather than include a hand grip, the whole of his weapon was sheathed in somewhat tarnished-looking bare metal. The blade utilized a set of red crystals supplied by Vader. Marek wielded the weapon with an unorthodox reversed grip, and utilized it against the likes of Kota, Kazdan Paratus, Shaak Ti, as well as Vader himself in numerous sparring matches. In addition to wielding it in combat, Marek also used the weapon to aid in his meditations, either holding it in front of his face and staring into the ignited blade, or telekinetically dismantling and reassembling it. This weapon was ultimately lost when Marek was first betrayed by Vader, when he was impaled, telekinetically pummeled, and hurled into space. The lightsaber was lost in the vacuum. After his resurrection on board the Empirical, Marek was given the weapon of Kota, which he had originally retrieved for Vader during his duel with the Jedi Master. Marek quickly adjusted to the green-bladed weapon, utilizing it during his escape from the Empirical. However, while Marek wielded the weapon successfully in combat, he never truly felt that it was his own, and was unsuccessful at utilizing it in his meditations. To rectify this, he replaced the green lightsaber crystal utilized by Kota with a blue crystal he found on Kashyyyk in the ruins of his family hut, the crystal from his father's lightsaber. After an hour of fine-tuning to fit in the new crystal, the weapon was finished. The newly modified weapon made Marek feel as though it truly was his lightsaber from that moment on. With the new aqua-colored crystal, the blade seemed lighter and moved more readily in Marek's hands. Galen had been uncomfortable with the green crystals in Kota's lightsaber, as they interfered with his concentration during meditation, and continuously reminded him of the lightsaber's former ownership. He found that the aqua crystals from his father's lightsaber were much more to his liking, as they possessed superior optical qualities, and the blade itself was somewhat easier to handle. He noted that the blue color made him think of oceans and rain, rather than the more destructive imagery fostered by his red lightsaber blade, though this didn't overly concern him. Despite this, he remained hopeful that Vader would provide him with a new set of red crystals when the time came to construct a new Sith lightsaber. In addition to these crystals, Galen possessed crystals of various different colors, such as yellow, gold, and purple, all in compressed and unstable varieties, signifying them to be synthetic in origin. Also, reportedly, he possessed a rarely seen crystal that produced a black blade. After the lightsaber modification, Marek continued to use the weapon, ultimately using it against the very man who gave it to him, Darth Vader. After defeating Vader, Marek wielded the weapon against his former master's master, Palpatine. Marek managed to subdue Palpatine, but ultimately was incapacitated by the Emperor's Force Lightning, which Marek blocked to save his friends from Palpatine's wrath. At the cost of his own life, the weapon remained with Marek until his death and was found beside him by Vader and Palpatine. As the Emperor turned to leave, Vader crushed the lightsaber to dust beneath his boot heel. During his years of training under Darth Vader, Galen Marek clad himself in a simple Imperial combat uniform. However, due to the years of wear and tear it suffered, by 3 before the Battle of Yavin, the uniform was a tattered mess, held together only by Marek's mending. Marek also possessed 2 variations of this basic outfit. After many years of use, the worn-out suit was mended for the harsh conditions Marek faced on his numerous missions for his master. During his time aboard the Empirical, Marek was clad in a simple standard-issue Imperial medical robe. When Marek was given his new mission to found the Rebel Alliance, the Rogue Shadow was given a fully stocked wardrobe. For the most part, the color range was limited to either black or brown, depending on whether he was representing the Sith or the Jedi, though he did possess other outfits. His original garment, provided by Darth Vader during the mission, was a heavy Sith robe that featured light armor plates and a large flowing black cape. One of his notable Jedi-inspired garments was the Jedi Adventure robe that he donned during the Corellian Treaty and continued to wear during his assault on the Death Star. Marek's bounty hunter disguise demonstrated a strong Mandalorian influence, notably in the breastplate and vambraces. His Corellian flight suit was predominantly green and featured a single bare metal pauldron on the right shoulder. The jungle combat gear he wore during his second visit to Felucia was based on ancient Massassi armor. The industrial explorer outfit he wore during his second visit to Raxus Prime appeared to be standard-issue hazardous environment protective wear. Galen Marek was a human male who stood 1 meter 85 centimeters tall. He had brown hair, brown eyes, and fair skin. As a child, he stood against Darth Vader, wielding the Sith Lord's own lightsaber against him out of a desire for vengeance after his father's murder. This desire marked Marek's first step towards the dark side, and Vader recognized this in him. Despite this desire for vengeance, he had not yet completely fallen, still being traumatized by Vader's massacre of the stormtroopers immediately afterwards. All of these traumatic events would cause Marek to repress all of his childhood memories and forget his own name, though his initial step towards the dark side remained a permanent part of his personality for much of his life. Starkiller was raised by Darth Vader, who was not a very kind father figure, creating turmoil, anger, and apathy in his mind. He was trained to be loyal, but also a ruthless assassin and an unstoppable force. Though he was brutally and continually punished by his master, Starkiller submitted willingly to the teaching method of the Dark Lord, essentially because he knew nothing else, and this instilled in him the belief that whatever did not kill him would make him stronger, more adept at wielding the dark side. Such was Starkiller's state of mind towards the end of his training. A part of him almost wished for death. His subjugation to Vader even displayed itself in his voice and manner, as he affected a formalized and faintly aristocratic accent whenever he was in Vader's presence, in stark contrast to his usual behavior. In addition, due to his lifelong isolation from all but a few individuals, Starkiller was reclusive and emotionally remote to all but Proxy, and only began to open up to Juno Eclipse after a great deal of time, though his feelings of compassion for her would continue to confuse him. Kota said that when Starkiller approached him on Bespin, his love for Juno was the one bright spot among all his dark thoughts that gave him hope that Marek could be redeemed. When hunting down and dispatching his targets, Starkiller was always satisfied that he had helped defend the Galactic Empire and fulfill his master's will. To that end, he was disturbed by the fact that he would have to cut down Imperial troops during his mission to kill General Kota, feeling that their only crime had been to cross his path. but he was careful to conceal his feelings from his master. At the same time, for much of his life, he had craved a confrontation with a Jedi Knight, and was excited by the prospect. While powerful and confident, Starkiller demonstrated many different sides to his personality. He was wary of his purpose in life, and what he was meant to do. He began with a sure focus on the Sith destiny trained into him by Vader. However, his exposure to both the Jedi, the light side of the Force, and also to the reality of Sith life caused his focus to waver. Ultimately, his innate sense of loyalty proved incompatible with Sith philosophy, and he gradually made his choices in life accordingly. After Vader's second betrayal on Corellia, Starkiller displayed not only anger, but also pity for the Dark Lord, remarking that if he were to die there, then Vader would never be free from his master. With the last betrayal, Starkiller rejected the Sith and the dark side, and finally admitted his love for Juno Eclipse, and held on to it until his death. When he converted to the light, the last of his persona as Starkiller ceased to exist, and he reclaimed his birth name, Galen, and fully accepted his destiny in the makings of a Jedi. During his battle with Darth Vader, Galen stated that he did not hate the Dark Lord, but pitied him, declaring that he would kill him to free him. When the Emperor tempted Marek into killing Vader, Marek struggled briefly with his emotions, but in the end decided he would not return to the dark side, and so made his choice to attack the Emperor instead, saving himself from the dark side. In the end, Galen Marek was driven by loyalty to his friends and allies, and willingly surrendered his life for them. Palpatine was far from pleased with the results of the battle on the Death Star. Not only was he robbed of an extremely powerful new apprentice, and still burdened with the diminished Vader, but the prisoners had escaped, and would go on to lead a rebellion that had inadvertently been created by the two Sith Lords themselves. However, thanks to Marek's actions, the Empire finally knew who their enemies were, and Vader vowed to hunt down and crush them, as his master intended long ago. Sidious correctly foresaw that the rebels had to be quickly and decisively dealt with, or else they could very well pose a grave threat to his totalitarian rule. Indeed, this would come to fruition as the Battle of Yavin took place merely a few years later. The duel also had another outcome, in that it drove a further wedge between the Sith Lords. Vader realized that Sidious desired a new apprentice, and as a result, he became determined to find a powerful Force-sensitive apprentice to help him overthrow his master in earnest. Marek's sacrifice inspired the rebels to finish what he began, a full-scale revolution against the Empire. Juno and Bail recovered Proxy from the snow on Corellia, who then revealed that Marek told him that if anything happened to him, Proxy was to be in charge of Juno. Immediately after recovering Proxy, they, along with the other founders of the rebellion, met on Kashyyyk. Princess Leia proposed that the rebels use the Marek family crest as a symbol of hope to rally behind, with which all agreed. The Rebel Alliance, as well as the New Republic, its successor states, and even the New Jedi Order, would use his crest and variants of it over the next century. Juno asked Kota if he knew that the man who created the Alliance was the same one who tried to kill him less than a year earlier. Kota revealed that he had always known, and still agreed to help. He explained that despite all of the dark thoughts that filled the Sith assassin's mind, Kota was able to glimpse at the one bright thing that Galen held on to until the very end: Juno. 6 months after the death of Galen Marek, Darth Vader brought his body to Kamino and stored it within the cloning facility of Temira City. The body would serve as the genetic template that Vader needed hoping to clone a more powerful and obedient version of his deceased apprentice. Further information referring to Subject 1138 has been removed from this battle analysis report and will be included in a separate one. Before my thoughts, opinions, and commentary, here's some extra information on Starkiller. Starkiller / Galen Marek was first conceived as what Luke Skywalker would have hypothetically become had he joined Darth Vader at the end of Star Wars Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back. Galen's surname, Marek, is also a common Polish, Czech, and Slovakian given name, and the Eastern Europe variant of Marco, while his first name, Galen, is a Greek name that means calm and healer, although it is also the Swedish word for crazy and mad. Starkiller is one of my personal favorite characters, as I played the game a long time ago, and it holds a very important presence in my memories. The game was released in 2008. I think a few years later, probably when I was 16 or so, I struggled to obtain it. Where I'm from, the internet took a long time to develop and, to reach the speed that it is today. And back then it was extremely slow to download anything, let alone upload. I recall the game was around 16 gigabytes big, and it took me a collective count of 30 to 40 days of downloading, nights not included, for me to obtain this game. We weren't exactly rich back then, and the PC I had was definitely not qualified to run a game of this complexity, with so many visuals and everything. But, I know I thought I didn't get this far to quit now. So I actually didn't manage to finish the game, because at a certain point my PC would become so overburdened that it would just shut down at a certain point in the game, and I could never get past that point. So the game was sort of always beyond reach for a time, as I couldn't finish it for a few years. And with time, faster internet arrived, and I managed to buy a new computer and finally finish the game. So Star Wars The Force Unleashed, which is the first game where Starkiller makes an appearance, was easily one of the most memorable, defining games of my youth, right after Knights of the Old Republic. Knights of the Old Republic is more philosophical and story-driven, whereas I know when I saw The Force Unleashed for the first time on accident online, all the way back then, I thought, there's no way this can be real. A Star Wars game with a guy running around, frying people with lightning, electrifying his blade, he's throwing things everywhere. It was so stunning to see, and the only Star Wars games I'd played by then were Jedi Outcast, Jedi Academy, and Knights of the Old Republic, and maybe some strategy games. So this game was the first step into the world of Force users, and it was really exciting to see it executed so well. Overall, I enjoyed the complexity of the character, and it's definitely a new take which delivered something that I never really thought of the comparison to a dark side version of Luke Skywalker. That never came to my mind until I literally read online that was what he was supposed to be. To me, just my personal opinion, one Luke Skywalker isn't that deep of a character. I'm a much bigger fan of the actor for Luke Skywalker than the actual character of Luke. To me, he's sort of like vanilla, while characters like Yoda, Vader, or Starkiller have a lot more interesting points to observe and ponder. Starkiller was essentially brought up within the dark side way, so it was very interesting to see this change take place within him when he began turning to the light. I also did not think that he was ever essentially corrupted by the dark side in terms of his spirit. He performed these tasks and killed whom he needed to kill solely on orders from Vader, so he was doing what he felt was right and what was his mission. But I never picked up on this sinister evil side of him that enjoyed killing and torturing people. So when he was allowed to breathe for a moment without his restraints after, Vader betrayed him, it made perfect sense that his mind would very quickly turn to the light, because that's who he was at the core. You know me, and I really do enjoy applying things from games to our real world, as you probably noticed in the previous videos. And seeing Starkiller betrayed I think that is what it feels like for the first time to be free of all bounds that might hold us back, because after he was betrayed, he really didn't have anyone to go to in terms of telling him what needed to be done next, or who he was, or which side he belonged to. So his individuality was allowed to grow and make a choice for the first time. Vader betrayed him, so it didn't matter if he displeased him somehow, and the Alliance leaders thought of him as a betrayer at this point. So that moment was a crossroads of choosing what to do next, and there was no one there to sort of influence him. And if we look at that for ourselves in our own lives, it's important to get to that state of mind and just ask yourself, what is it that you want to do with your life outside of all the bounds of influences from other, individuals, whether it be family, friends, or in this context, Sith or Jedi Masters. On another note, I do find it slightly ironic and amusing that one Starkiller who never really had a hunger for power seemed to have so much of it, and was able to ultimately overpower his masters. He also represented an individual who was very unique to the Force, and while his alignment was primarily dark side oriented, he seemed to be uncorrupted by it. For instance, Force lightning is predominantly described as a dark side power, but a form of it is usable by lightsiders, and Marek retained this quote-unquote dark side power even after his conversion to the light, and it was equally devastating as when he had been aligned to the dark side. So it makes you think that perhaps this strength, this power, doesn't really come from the dark side as much as you would think. He also drew on both the light and the dark in his final conflict. As a lightsider, he could only match the Emperor's power, but drawing on the dark side with that at the right moment gave him that advantage. And I honestly am unsure if this ability to stay in between the two extremes is a result of him being so powerful, or if he became powerful because he could stay in between. Because he could easily be described as one of the most powerful Force users that ever lived, because he held such great power and his training wasn't even fully complete, as a Sith Lord. He didn't have decades or centuries of experience as some of the most powerful Sith in history did. Marek's clone, which we will talk about in another video, was even more proficient in the way he'd use the Force. So for example, he could set stormtrooper armor on fire with Force lightning. Starkiller also easily falls into the category of great names such as Revan, Darth Bane, or Darth Sidious when it comes to Force affinity. He could create variants of Force lightning like Force Storm and Chain Lightning, which are extreme levels that are just display an area of effect control. He could also create a lightning shield around himself. The only known user besides him was Emperor Palpatine. This also applies to a variant of Force lightning that's called Lightning Grenade, which essentially involves electrocuting a target, then slamming them into something, which results in an explosion of built-up lightning energy within the target. So yeah, an exquisite character. I honestly could not care less if he's canon or not. I do not care. I enjoy this story. I enjoy everything about him. And quite honestly, I've moved past the discussions of what is canon and what isn't. I just want good content. I just enjoy the mental images I get just revisiting the character and character depth. I also personally enjoyed Sam Witwer's voice acting, especially when he had to scream during the character's display of Force powers. I know I was like, that is some really good, intense acting right there. I'll also do another power analysis video on the clone of Starkiller, which is the Subject 1138. So we can cover the story and power capabilities of that one at a later point in time, because we don't want this video to be too long. So I'd also like to wrap up this video by saying a huge thanks to all the supportive comments. It's a huge pleasure that you're enjoying the content, especially of those of you who just, enjoy lying back and just listening to the audio. I was considering maybe posting audio-only variants of the content somewhere else online where you can listen to it without interruption. By this, I mainly mean ads, because I'm aware that most YouTube users are used to handling ads, but I also think that we all know that they're necessary for YouTube channels to stay afloat. But I also know what it's like to get really into the audio and then be interrupted halfway through it. So let me know what you think about that. I might even, you know, post audio somewhere in podcast form, or maybe even put them on Patreon, for example, if that's appropriate. Let me know what you think. We'll see. Either way, thank you for all the feedback. Keep it coming, and I will see you very soon. Cheers. Time for the outro. I think I made a new one. I don't know. I'm recording this before I get to make a new outro. If I made a new outro, here's a new outro. If I didn't, oh well.